So I have a question here. How did the Ascended Masters create us when they ascended only a couple hundred years back? Buddha, Saint Germain, Jesus walked the earth as human beings before ascending. Okay, so I have in some videos I have talked about how we are all created out of the Ascended Masters. I've said that we have the outer personality, but the core of our being is what I call the conscious you. And the conscious you is an extension of our higher selves, or the I Am Presence, which resides in the spiritual realm. And the I Am Presence is created out of Ascended Masters. And so the questioner, I can understand the question, I've heard it before, of course, is saying, well, how can the Ascended Masters have created us if they only ascended a few hundred years ago? But that's because you don't quite grasp then that there are many Ascended Masters. There are Ascended Masters who ascended a very long time ago. And what you need to do is watch my video on how the world was created. Because in there I explain that there have been several creations, several spheres before ours. And the original one, the first one, was created by the Creator. And the Creator then sent extensions of itself into the first sphere. And they started out pretty much like we did, with a very localized sense of self. They expanded their sense of self until they ascended. So they were the Ascended Masters that ascended in the first sphere. And they then created the second sphere. And out of their beings was then created the beings who took embodiment in that sphere. And that pattern has continued. We are in the seventh of these spheres. So the Ascended Masters who created us were the ones who ascended in the previous sphere, and therefore also were part of creating our sphere. So they ascended a very, very long time ago. And so you have to kind of make a distinction here between Ascended Masters who ascended a long time ago, in other words, before our sphere, and Ascended Masters who ascended from our sphere. And the reason why it's important to make that distinction is, first of all, it's the Ascended Masters who ascended a long time ago who created us and the world we live in. But it's also important to note that there are Masters who have ascended in our sphere because it helps us see that we can do the same. I mean, the motto of the Ascended Masters is, what one has done, all can do. And so that's the reason why they present themselves as Ascended Masters and talk about the process of the ascension, is that when we see that they have gone through this process, we can be encouraged and realize we can do the same. Now, there is a question, of course, that some people have when they hear about Ascended Masters, and that is, why have I never heard about Ascended Masters? And I've talked about it a little bit in other videos, but just a brief summary here. Number one, the Ascended Masters are here to help us grow. But there are beings who are threatened by our growth, what I call the fallen beings. And the fallen beings have, as I also explained in my video about how the world was created, they have rejected the Ascended Masters in a previous sphere. So they have just continued that rejection, and they don't want anybody to know that Ascended Masters exist. So after the fallen beings were allowed to embody on Earth, they've done everything they could to keep the population ignorant of the existence of Ascended Masters. And the reason why many people don't want to hear about Ascended Masters, because many people don't. Many religious people, many spiritual people, many atheists, they don't want to hear about Ascended Masters because, as I just said, when we realize they are Masters who have ascended from our sphere, we see that we can do the same. But if you're not willing to take responsibility for yourself, if you don't want to grow, if you don't want to look at yourself in your own psychology, if you don't want to look at a beam in your own eye, you don't want to know that there are other people who have done something you are not willing to do. You want to believe that being a human being means just being a passive, you're either an evolved ape or you are a sinner who's just waiting for Jesus to come and save you. If you don't want to take responsibility and say, it's up to me to raise my consciousness so I can enter the kingdom of heaven, then you don't want to hear about Ascended Masters. And then it's easy to deny them, and of course there are all kinds of religions, scientific materialism, but even many spiritual philosophies that deny or ignore the existence of Ascended Masters And that means your ego, and I've now given several talks about the ego, your ego can then make you believe that you don't need to think about ascending. You don't really need to think about raising your consciousness, getting rid of the ego. You just need to follow what I call the outer path, and then you will someday magically make it to whatever the goal is that's defined in that teaching. So the Ascended Masters is a challenging concept. It really requires us to rethink what we were brought up to believe. But it's definitely absolutely worth it, because the concept of the ascension, it's the ultimate liberation. It's the ultimate liberation from Earth. And when you experience the presence of the Ascended Masters, you feel that not only they're there to help us and support us, but they also love us unconditionally. And it's a very, very liberating feeling to experience that personally.